What happens when Hollywood's most diplomatic superstar sits down with television's most charming interrogator? Tonight, we uncover how a polite interview with Graham Norton turned into an all-out televised disaster as Brad Pitt's legendary composure shattered under the studio lights. Stick around because this showdown only gets more explosive. It started as a charming chat and ended in chaos. Before you judge, hear every cutting word that pushed Brad Pitt over the edge. This isn't just another celebrity interview. This is a Hollywood reckoning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The BBC Television Centre buzzed with electric anticipation on this crisp London evening. Outside, hundreds of fans pressed against metal barriers, their breath visible in the autumn air as they clutched handmade posters and phone cameras. Security guards maintained order while photographers jostled for position, their flashes creating a strobe light atmosphere against the iconic building's facade. Brad Pitt's black Mercedes glided to the entrance like a sleek predator, and when he emerged, tall, silver-haired, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the crowd erupted. He moved with that effortless grace that had captivated audiences for 3 decades, flashing his trademark smile and offering a casual wave. His publicist, a sharp-dressed woman in her 50s, stayed close beside him, her eyes scanning the scene with professional wariness. "Brad! Over here!" Voices called from every direction, but he navigated the chaos with practiced ease, stopping briefly to sign a few autographs before disappearing through the studio doors. Inside the green room, the atmosphere was warm and civilized. Alice Munro, the British actress promoting her new stage production, sat elegantly in a cream-colored chair, sipping tea and chatting politely with Brad about London theatre. Her laugh was genuine, her energy infectious, the perfect co-guest for what was supposed to be a light-hearted evening. Producer Simon Hart moved through the space with clipboard in hand, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. This wasn't just any episode, this was Brad Pitt, and Simon could practically smell the ratings gold. The studio lights blazed with that familiar warmth as Graham Norton took his position behind the curved desk, his trademarked mischievous grin already in place. The audience, a mix of tourists, locals, and die-hard fans who'd won tickets through various competitions, buzzed with excitement. The famous red sofa gleamed under the lights, waiting for its evening's occupants. "Ladies and gentlemen," Graham announced with theatrical flair, "tonight we have the incomparable Alice Munro, fresh from conquering the West End, and Hollywood royalty himself, Brad Pitt." The applause was thunderous as both guests emerged from backstage. Alice, radiant in a deep blue dress, waved gracefully to the crowd. But when Brad appeared, the energy shifted to another level entirely. He looked relaxed, almost amused by the reception, giving that boyish grin that had melted hearts since Thelma and Louise. "Brad," Graham said warmly as they settled onto the sofa, "it's not often we get genuine movie stars on this little show of ours. How are you finding London?" Brad chuckled, his voice carrying that familiar gravelly warmth. "London's been incredible, Graham. Though I have to say, I got completely lost trying to find a decent cup of coffee yesterday. Ended up in 3 different Starbucks before someone took pity on me and pointed me toward a proper cafe." The audience laughed appreciatively, and Alice jumped in with her own coffee horror story from her early days in New York. The banter flowed easily, Graham's quick wit bouncing off Brad's dry humor and Alice's theatrical storytelling. For these opening minutes, everything felt perfect. Graham leaned back in his chair, shuffling his cards with casual confidence. "Now, Brad, you're here to talk about your new documentary, which sounds absolutely fascinating. But first, I have to ask, after all these years in Hollywood, do you still get nervous for interviews?" Brad's smile remained steady, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Only when the host has a reputation for making people squirm," he replied, with a laugh that carried just the slightest edge. After the commercial break, the studio's energy felt subtly different. Graham had clearly decided it was time to dig deeper, and even the audience seemed to sense the shift in his demeanor. "Welcome back," Graham said, his smile still bright, but his eyes more focused. "We're here with the lovely Alice Munro and the legendary Brad Pitt. Now, Brad, I have to ask, you've been in the public eye for over 30 years. That's longer than some of our audience members have been alive. What's it like living under the microscope for that long?" Brad's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, his shoulders tensing slightly. "Well, Graham, I think you learned to focus on what really matters. The work, the family, the causes you believe in. The rest is just noise." "Just noise?" Graham pressed, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. "But surely some of that noise affects you. The speculation, the headlines, the constant analysis of your every move." Alice glanced between the two men, her smile becoming more forced as she sensed the conversation's trajectory. In the control booth, Simon Hart spoke quietly into his headset. "Keep pushing. This is good television." Brad's laugh came out a bit too sharp. "You know what I've learned, Graham? The moment you start caring what people say about you in the tabloids, you've already lost. I'm here to talk about a documentary that might actually help endangered wildlife, not to psychoanalyze my relationship with fame." The redirection was smooth, professional, but Graham caught the defensive undertone. He made a show of shuffling his cards, buying time while his mind calculated the next move. Of course," Graham said with exaggerated agreeableness. "Though I have to say, for someone who claims not to care about headlines, you've certainly provided plenty of them over the years." The audience fell silent. Even they could sense that Graham had just thrown down a gauntlet. Brad's smile remained in place, but his eyes hardened, and Alice suddenly found her tea incredibly fascinating. "Haven't we all, Graham?" Brad replied quietly, his voice carrying a warning that everyone in the studio, except perhaps Graham himself, seemed to understand perfectly. Graham's smile widened, and anyone who knew him well would have recognized the dangerous glint in his eyes. This was the moment he lived for, when a carefully controlled celebrity interview teetered on the edge of becoming something real, something unpredictable. "Well, since we're talking about headlines," Graham said with deceptive casualness, "I suppose it's impossible not to mention the romantic ones. I mean, Brad, you've had some of the most high-profile relationships in Hollywood history. Jennifer, Angelina, the whole world felt like they had front-row seats to your love life. Do you ever miss the days when you could date someone without it becoming international news?" The studio fell into an expectant hush. Alice Munro's cup clinked against her saucer as she set it down with slightly shaky hands. In the control booth, Simon Hart leaned forward, his pulse quickening. This was exactly the territory they'd hoped to reach. Brad's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his media training kicked in. "Graham, I think you're confusing me with someone who wants to relitigate ancient history on live television. I'm here to talk about conservation, not gossip." "Oh, come on," Graham pressed, his tone playfully conspiratorial. "It's not gossip when it's been splashed across every magazine cover for 2 decades. Surely you can understand why people are curious. The fairy tale wedding, the family, then the very public split. It's like a modern-day Greek tragedy." "Is that what you call other people's pain? Entertainment?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Alice shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between the two men. The audience sensed the shift in atmosphere. The laughter was becoming more nervous, more uncertain. Graham's expression didn't waver, but there was steel in his voice now. "I call it human interest, Brad. People invest emotionally in public figures. That comes with the territory, doesn't it?" "No," Brad replied quietly, his voice carrying a warning that made several audience members lean forward.
Graham sensed he was approaching dangerous waters, but like a shark drawn to blood, he couldn't resist pushing further. The producer's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Ask about the kids. Ratings are through the roof." "Speaking of family," Graham said, his tone shifting to false warmth, "you've got 6 beautiful children. Do they watch your movies? I always wonder if celebrity kids see their parents differently when they're up on the big screen, playing these life-large characters." The question seemed innocent enough, but it landed on Brad like a physical blow. His entire posture changed, shoulders squaring, jaw setting, the easy charm evaporating entirely. Alice actually flinched, recognizing the shift in energy. "My children," Brad said, slowly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "are off limits." "Oh, I didn't mean anything invasive," Graham backtracked quickly, but his curiosity was piqued by Brad's reaction. "But surely it's fair to ask about the challenges of parenting in the spotlight. You've spoken about it in other interviews." "Have I?" Brad interrupted, his eyes flashing with something dangerous. "Or did someone else decide I had spoken about it?" The studio had gone completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath. Alice looked like she wanted to disappear into the red sofa cushions. In the control booth, Simon Hart was torn between cutting to commercial and letting this train wreck continue for the sake of television gold. Graham's smile faltered for the first time all evening. He'd pushed countless celebrities over the years, that something in Brad's voice, a protective fury barely held in check, made him realize he might have miscalculated. "I think," Alice interjected desperately, her British accent crisp with forced cheerfulness, "we should talk about Brad's documentary. It sounds absolutely fascinating." But Graham couldn't let it go. "Brad, I think you're being a bit sensitive here."
The words were barely out of his mouth when Brad's expression went completely cold. "Sensitive?" Brad repeated, the word dripping with quiet menace. He leaned forward slightly, and suddenly the power dynamic in the room shifted completely. "Let me ask you something, Graham. How long have you been doing this show?" Graham blinked, caught off guard by the reversal. About 15 years?" 15 years, Brad nodded thoughtfully. "And in all that time, have you ever had someone sit here and dissect your personal relationships on live television? Ask about your private struggles, your family dynamics, your children?" "Well, I don't have children, so lucky you, because then you'd understand what it feels like to have someone use them as conversation fodder for entertainment." The audience was riveted now, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't the usual celebrity deflection or polite redirection. This was Brad Pitt, one of Hollywood's most diplomatic stars, going on the offensive. Graham's composure was cracking. "Brad, I think you're overreacting. This is just conversation." "Is it?" Brad's voice remained dangerously calm, because from where I'm sitting, it feels like an interrogation disguised as small talk. "Tell me, Graham, what exactly were you hoping to get out of this line of questioning? A confession? A breakdown? Something you could turn into a viral clip?" Alice had given up all pretense of comfort, sitting rigid with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. In the control booth, Simon was frantically debating whether to intervene, but the ratings were astronomical. This was the kind of television that made careers. Graham attempted to regain control with a nervous laugh. "I think you're overreading this, Brad. It's just..." "Just what?" Brad interrupted again, his eyes never leaving Graham's face. "Just the price of fame? Just what I signed up for? Just entertainment for your audience?" The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Graham opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time in 15 years of hosting, he was completely outmaneuvered. Brad sat back, his message was clear. The interview was now on his terms, or it wasn't happening at all. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Graham's face had gone pale under the studio lights, his usual confidence evaporating as he realized he'd lost complete control of his own show. But pride is a dangerous thing, and 15 years of television success wasn't about to let him back down now. "Look, Brad," Graham said, his voice strained but determined, "I understand you want to protect your family, but the custody battle, the allegations, these aren't secrets. They've been in court documents, newspaper headlines. Surely you can understand why people have questions about—" "Stop." The word came out like a gunshot. Brad's entire body had gone rigid, his hands gripping the armrests of the sofa so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The audience collectively held its breath. Alice Munro looked like she was witnessing a car accident in slow motion, her eyes wide with horror and fascination. In the control booth, Simon Hart was no longer thinking about ratings. He was thinking about lawsuits and PR disasters and how quickly he could cut to commercial. Graham attempted to regain control with a nervous laugh. "I think you're being started," but he never got to finish the sentence. Brad stood up. The movement was so sudden, so unexpected, that several audience members gasped audibly. Alice's teacup clattered against her saucer as she jumped slightly in her seat. "I'm done," Brad said simply, his voice carrying across the silent studio like a bell toll. For a moment that felt like an eternity, nobody moved. Brad stood beside the red sofa like a statue, his face set in granite, while Graham stared up at him in complete shock. The studio lights seemed harsher somehow, casting sharp shadows across both men's faces. "Brad," Graham said weakly, "come on, sit down. Let's just—" "No." Brad reached up and calmly unclipped his microphone, the small device falling to the coffee table with a sharp plastic crack that echoed through the silent studio. "I said, I'm done." He turned to Alice, who was sitting frozen with her mouth slightly open. "Alice, it was lovely meeting you. I hope your play is a tremendous success." His voice was warm again, genuinely kind, as if the previous tension had never existed. Then he looked back at Graham and the warmth disappeared entirely. "Graham, thank you for reminding me why I stopped doing talk shows for 5 years." The words hung in the air like acid. Graham's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his famous wit completely deserting him at the moment he needed it most. Behind the cameras, crew members stood frozen, unsure whether to keep filming or look away from the train wreck unfolding before them. Brad walked toward the edge of the set with measured steps, his posture straight and dignified despite the chaos he was leaving behind. The audience watched in stunned silence as one of the world's biggest movie stars simply left. "Brad, wait!" Graham called out desperately, half rising from his chair, but it was too late. Brad Pitt walked past the cameras, past the gaping crew members, and disappeared into the wings without looking back. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the silence until even that faded away. Graham was left sitting alone at his desk, his face cycling through expressions of shock, embarrassment, and something that might have been regret. Alice Munro remained motionless on the sofa, her eyes wide with disbelief. In the control booth, Simon Hart stared at his monitors in horror, watching 15 years of television experience crumble in real time. The phones were already starting to ring. The silence in the studio stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Graham Norton, veteran of 1,000 interviews and master of the unexpected moment, sat paralyzed behind his desk like a deer caught in headlights. The audience remained frozen, unsure whether to applaud, gasp, or flee. Finally, Graham's survival instincts kicked in. He forced his famous smile back onto his face, though it looked more like a grimace under the harsh studio lights. "Well," he said, his voice slightly hoarse, "that's not quite how we planned to end this segment." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the audience, but the atmosphere remained thick with tension. I suppose that's the beauty of live television. You never quite know what's going to happen. Alice Munro, still clutching her teacup like a lifeline, managed a weak smile. "Quite exciting, really," she said in her crisp British accent, though her voice wavered slightly. The audience laughed more genuinely this time, grateful for any release from the suffocating tension. Meanwhile, backstage, Brad strode through the narrow corridors with purpose, his publicist appearing seemingly from nowhere to fall into step beside him. She didn't say a word, didn't need to. 20 years of working together had taught her when to speak and when to simply clear the path. "Car's waiting," she said quietly as they approached the exit. "Good. Let's go home." Outside, the crowd of fans was still pressed against the barriers, but something had changed. Phones were out, social media was buzzing, and word was already spreading that something unprecedented had just happened inside the BBC studios. Back in the control booth, Simon Hart was fielding frantic calls from network executives while watching his monitors display the most watched segment in the show's history. His phone buzzed with notifications. Clips of the walkout were already trending on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Hashtag Brad Pitt walkout was climbing the charts faster than anyone could track. "Sir," his assistant said breathlessly, "the phones haven't stopped ringing. Entertainment Tonight, Access Hollywood, TMZ, everyone wants a statement." Simon stared at the screens, watching the numbers climb, and realized he'd just witnessed television history, for better or worse. By morning, the world had changed. The clip of Brad Pitt's walkout dominated every entertainment news cycle from Los Angeles to London. Morning shows played it on repeat, dissecting every facial expression, every word, every pause. Hashtag Brad Pitt walkout had become the #1 trending topic globally, surpassing political scandals and natural disasters. In his Notting Hill hotel suite, Brad sat with his morning coffee, scrolling through the headlines with weary resignation. "Brad Pitt storms off set," screamed one tabloid. "Hollywood meltdown live on TV," declared another. His publicist had already fielded over 200 interview requests and counting. Meanwhile, across London, Graham Norton prepared for his radio show, knowing he'd faced questions about the incident. His producer briefed him on the overnight coverage. The split was roughly 50-50. Half the internet praised him for asking tough questions that other interviewers wouldn't dare to ask. The other half accused him of ambushing a grieving father for cheap television thrills. "I stand by my questions," Graham told his radio audience that morning, his voice measured and professional. "When public figures use their platform to promote projects, they open themselves to scrutiny. That's not cruelty, that's accountability." But privately, watching the clip again in his dressing room, Graham felt something he rarely experienced: doubt. The moment when Brad mentioned his children, the flash of genuine pain across his face, had he pushed too hard? By afternoon, Brad released a statement through his representatives. "I remain committed to my work and to protecting my family's privacy. Some boundaries are non-negotiable." It was gracious, measured, and said everything without saying anything at all. The documentary premiered 2 weeks later to massive audiences, partly driven by the controversy. Critics praised Brad's passionate advocacy for wildlife conservation, noting the irony that his most personal moment on television had ultimately served his most meaningful cause. Graham's show continued to dominate ratings, the incident cementing his reputation as television's most fearless interviewer. But staff noticed he was slightly more careful with questions about family, slightly more aware of the human cost of viral moments. The clip would be replayed for years, dissected in media studies courses, and remembered as the night two masters of their craft collided in spectacular fashion, leaving both forever changed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up.
Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.
If you liked the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.